June 22, 1941. The morning sky over Grodno is streaked with smoke, the air shaking with the thunder of artillery. German tanks roll east, dust trailing behind them, crews confident that the Soviet frontier will collapse in days. Among the scattered wrecks of Panzer III's, General Heinz Guderian steps down from his staff car. He inspects a burned-out vehicle, armor plates scarred with deep gouges. Reports from the battlefield are the same across the front, shells bouncing harmlessly off a new Soviet tank. Officers whisper nervously, unsure if it is exaggeration or truth. Guderian listens silently, his expression flat, but the weight in his pause is heavier than the guns around him. Something has appeared on the battlefield that was not expected, something dangerous. In the haze, soldiers glimpse the shape. The sound comes first, a steady grinding of tracks over mud, louder than the crack of rifles. Then the silhouette rises, dark green, low and wide, armor angled like a knife's edge. A 76mm cannon swings forward with mechanical precision. German gunners fire, but sparks burst off the sloped armor, ricochets flashing in daylight. The tank keeps moving, fast, almost gliding where panzers would bog down. For the infantry watching from their trenches, it is not just another machine, it is a wall of steel that will not stop. The danger lies not in one tank, but in numbers. A single Soviet armored division could bring 200 of these vehicles forward. That meant over 1,000 men inside armored hulls, with thousands more in trucks and support units behind them. Each tank carried enough diesel to cover 300 kilometers without refueling and ammunition for 500 cannon shots. A division could push across provinces before needing resupply. For the Wehrmacht, already stretching supply lines hundreds of kilometers into Soviet territory, this was a threat to the entire timetable of Operation Barbarossa. Blitzkrieg depended on speed, on overrunning weak defenses. But against machines that could outlast them, the math began to turn against the invaders. In Berlin, planners had dismissed Soviet armor as outdated and clumsy. Reports filed in early 1941 described Soviet tanks as weak, slow, and limited in range. The T-34 shattered those assumptions within days. Its presence forced German officers to reconsider their entire campaign. What was meant to be a lightning war suddenly met resistance made of steel and endurance. Behind the front, a different war was being fought. Trains thundered eastward, carrying disassembled factories, lathes, presses, and entire assembly lines. Stalin's government had prepared long before, moving industry past the Ural Mountains where German bombers could not reach. In makeshift workshops hidden in forests and even tunnels carved into stone, sparks flew from welding torches as hulls took shape. Women, teenagers, and old men filled the roles left by conscripted workers, hammering steel, riveting plates, and pouring molten armor. Each day, more tanks emerged from the lines. German intelligence had expected Soviet production to collapse under air raids. Instead, it scattered and multiplied. The numbers tell the scale of the Soviet response. In 1941, just over 3,000 T-34's were built. By 1942, production more than doubled. By 1943, over 15,000 rolled out in a single year. This was not improvisation. It was an industrial system working like gears in a machine. One plant specialized in armor plates, another in turrets, another in engines. Components traveled by rail, converging at final assembly halls where workers bolted and welded them together. The German war machine could not match this pace. For every Tiger they produced, the Soviets built 10 T-34's. The design itself was simple but brilliant. At 26 tons, the tank balanced protection with mobility. Its armor was angled at 60 degrees, deflecting rounds instead of absorbing them. The 76.2mm main gun outranged the standard German 37mm and 50mm weapons, striking targets effectively at 1,000 meters. Under the hull, the 500-horsepower V2 diesel engine burned cooler than German gasoline motors, less likely to burst into flames when hit. Wide tracks spread the weight evenly, letting the tank glide across mud and snow where German panzers struggled. Its top speed of 33 miles per hour on open ground made it fast enough to outmaneuver enemies. It was not the strongest or heaviest tank in existence, but it was the most balanced. Firepower, armor, and mobility combined into one reliable package. The battlefield confirmed it. In October 1941, near Mtsensk, German soldiers dug in, convinced their panzers and artillery could hold the line. Then came the roar. Dozens of T-34's advanced through smoke, engines howling, tracks crushing earth. German shells slammed into the armor and bounced away. Anti-tank crews scrambled, firing desperately, but rounds failed to penetrate. The Soviet tanks rolled forward, firing on the move, shells tearing into bunkers and vehicles. Infantry panicked as barricades splintered under the weight of advancing tracks. One German officer later described it as a nightmare of steel in his report. For the men on the ground, it felt as if the entire war had changed in an instant. The Wehrmacht adapted. They had no choice. Commanders ordered heavier guns to the front, the 50mm Pak 38, the 75mm Pak 40, and the feared 88mm anti-aircraft cannon repurposed as a tank killer. Stuka dive bombers were reassigned to stalk Soviet armored columns, striking them with screaming precision from above. Tactics evolved rapidly. No longer would German tanks try to duel the T-34 head-on. Instead, ambushes were set in forests and villages, firing at the thinner side armor, at tracks and engines. Convoys were escorted by half-tracks, infantry supported by heavier guns. The German army reshaped its methods around one urgent truth. The T-34 could not be ignored, but the Soviet tank was not invincible. Inside, the crew endured brutal conditions. Most early models lacked radios, forcing commanders to wave flags or bang on turret walls to signal maneuvers. Drivers peered through narrow slits, struggling to see anything in smoke or dust. The gunner and loader worked in cramped space, their ears ringing after every shot, their arms bruised from handling heavy shells. Winters brought new torments. Diesel engines froze solid, forcing crews to light fires beneath the hull just to start the machines. The rush of wartime production also meant reliability was uneven. Soviet records admitted that up to 30% of tanks broke down in their first weeks of service, not because of enemy fire, but because of mechanical failure. The T-34 was powerful, but it punished the men who operated it. By 1942, the Germans regained confidence. At Kharkov, Soviet armored forces suffered catastrophic losses. Entire brigades of T-34's were destroyed, their 76mm guns no longer able to pierce the armor of upgraded Panzer IV's or the new Tiger heavy tanks. German firepower had caught up. Reports from the front described the shock of Soviet crews as their once dominant machines were blown apart in open battle. Over 600 Soviet tanks were lost in that campaign alone. Soldiers who had believed the T-34 to be unbeatable now realized its weaknesses. For a time, the balance swung back to the Wehrmacht. The Soviet answer was speed of adaptation. In design bureaus across the country, engineers worked under relentless pressure. They studied captured German tanks, measuring armor thickness, testing gun performance, and redesigning their own vehicles. Within months, an improved model was on the way. The T-34-85 carried a larger turret with an 85mm gun, capable of penetrating German heavy armor at range. Radios were finally added to most units. Wider tracks and refined engines gave better mobility in snow and mud. Production lines were adjusted with ruthless efficiency. Quantity remained high, but now quality improved as well. On the battlefield, improvisation became routine. Crews welded spare track links to the front as makeshift armor. Mechanics scavenged parts from wrecked tanks, rebuilding machines from twisted hulks. Captured German equipment was repurposed, their machine guns bolted onto Soviet turrets. Commanders learned to attack in mass formations, overwhelming superior German machines with numbers. One T-34 might be lost, even 10, but 20 more would arrive to finish the fight. The Soviets accepted heavy losses because they knew factories would send replacements. Their confidence was summed up in a bitter joke. "Our best armor is the factory behind us." All of this led to the decisive clash at Kursk in July 1943. The battlefield became the stage for the largest armored confrontation in history. More than 6,000 tanks and armored vehicles fought across rolling fields and mine-laden ground. The Germans brought their newest weapons, Tigers, Panthers, and Ferdinand tank destroyers. They were powerful, heavily armored, and deadly at range. On paper, they should have dominated. But the Soviets fought with depth. Miles of trenches, thousands of mines, and batteries of artillery slowed the German advance. Waves of T-34's counterattacked, striking the flanks, swarming heavier tanks in groups. The noise was deafening. Engines roared like storms, machine guns rattled in endless bursts, and cannons fired until the air shook like thunder. Smoke choked the fields, flames rising from burning wrecks. Crews fought in suffocating heat, sweat pouring down their faces, hands raw from loading shells. The battlefield became a furnace, but the Soviets endured. Losses were staggering, hundreds of T-34's destroyed in a single day, but new waves kept arriving. German units could not match the replacement rate. Every Tiger lost was irreplaceable. Every Panther destroyed was a blow that could not be recovered. By the end of Kursk, the German armored spearhead was shattered. They would never again mount a major offensive in the east. The aftermath was clear. By 1945, nearly 58,000 T-34's had been built. No other tank of the war came close to those numbers. German engineering produced masterpieces of design, but they were too slow, too expensive, too few. The T-34 was not the strongest, not the most comfortable, but it was the right tank at the right time. It was mobile, it was powerful, and above all, it was produced in endless waves. When Soviet forces rolled into Berlin, the streets shook with the rumble of thousands of T-34's. For the German soldiers who had first seen it in the fields of 1941, the sight was a grim reminder of how the war had changed. What had begun as terror on the front became the symbol of Soviet victory. The lesson was undeniable. Wars are not always won by the best-designed weapon, but by the weapon that can fight longest, in greatest numbers, under the harshest conditions. The T-34 was that weapon. It was the steel gear that jammed the Nazi war machine until it broke. Its secret power was not in perfection, but in balance and scale, a tank simple enough to build by the tens of thousands, and strong enough to keep fighting until the war was won.